Good morning. Welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 29th day of April 2024. Geoffrey Wandeta is the Member of Parliament for Tetu constituency. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam. Good morning, viewers.
Anthony Oloch, Member of Parliament for Mathare constituency, Nairobi County. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Sam.
Fred Okango is the Political Affairs Secretary within KANU. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
And you're still expecting the Member of Parliament for Meru County, that is Elizabeth Kailemi, who is in the building, will be joining us shortly. And as she does that, looking at the papers this morning, and the Daily Nation is about state to revise next budget by 350 billion shillings. And you also see nature's fury. The story of heavy rains continue to wreak havoc. A flooded house in Mukuru kwa Ruben is the image that is defining the Daily Nation. On the Standard is the question of anatomy of a sick nation, the irony of a country that spends an arm and leg to train its highly prized professionals but wants to dump them in penury after graduation, while its poor citizens wallow in disease without timely treatment and opulence among political elites. And obviously, even as you speak about education, it is also our main story this morning, where the statement by Cabinet Secretary for Education, Ezekiel Machogu, came late in the night, in fact, past middle of the night, and it's communicating the decision by the government to postpone the reopening of schools by a week, saying that it would be imprudent to risk the lives of learners and staff before watertight measures are put in place to ensure adequate safety of all affected school communities. And the Cabinet Secretary is saying that this decision was taken after a directive last week to field officers to submit data from all basic education learning institutions countrywide to assist the government in assessing the readiness of the schools for the second term opening, which had been scheduled for this morning. Reports received at the Ministry of Education, corroborated with data from other relevant government agencies, show that a number of schools in various regions of the country have been adversely affected by the rains, and now that decision is taken to allow that in the meantime the ministry will work with relevant agencies and stakeholders to put in place measures to mitigate the adverse effects of the rains and provide regular updates on all developments as pertains to the education sector. And therefore, one of the areas affected by the heavy rains would appear to be in that education sector. Some parents have been asking questions as to how late this decision came, of course, affecting some who had already made the travel arrangements, some that may have made arrangements for their children to go to school this morning. Karambu Kailemia is the Member of Parliament for Meru constituency. Good morning.
Good morning.
Meru County, not constituency. So let's start the conversation here. And I'll begin with you, Honorable Oluoch, because you come from a constituency that has really suffered. You've seen images of devastation, but also residents moving to live in schools. Maybe you can help us understand, because yes, the Cabinet Secretary has made that decision, but what is it that we are not seeing that you've been able to witness in Mathare constituency?
Yes, I think, thank you very much, Sam. The untold story of Mathare constituency would be down in the villages itself. Mathare constituency has about 5,200 households that have been affected. If you take an average household of about 4 to 5 people, you're talking about between 20 to 26,000 families that have been affected. On a very light note, if you take a household from a Luya household, you're probably talking about 9 to 8 people. So the number of people really gets close to about 30,000 people who are most affected. The most vulnerable out of these would be about 12,000. So if you want to know about the untold stories, you take a walk inside of those villages that we call Vitongoji. I took a walk to close to about 4 of those wards. In hospital ward, Gitaduru, you go down to the river and a bridge has completely been washed out. A bridge that on a daily basis, traffic is about 3,000 to 4,000 people, children going to schools. Like this morning, children would be plying those bridges, and they're very dangerous foot bridges, and if you stand on those bridges, you really feel the impact and the amount of risk. People living around riverbanks, waters have risen to the level of about 10 to 15 meters, swamped into houses. You go into some of those houses and properties have been swept off. Books, beddings, household equipment, completely destroyed.
Nice.
I walked into one of those camps, and there are a number of camps. I think there is one in Msedo in Hospital Ward, another one in Gitaduru Hall, another one in Mabatini Hall. And I met this woman who lost 3 children, completely gone. She cannot find the children, 4, 5, 3-year-old. They cannot find their children. And I think one of the things that we must look at this point is the government's ability to respond to disaster in terms of the time response, in terms of the ability to have expert people, divers who can be able to retrieve and follow up and find where the lost people have lost their lives. We have volunteers, a lot of people who have come out to volunteer to secure and to find where these people are. And you find that they're doing it under very, very dangerous, deplorable situations. People without gloves, they don't have masks, they don't have gumboots, they don't have any of these facilities that would be able to respond to this situation. So I think then when you're looking at the 2 issues that are now at the forefront here, is one, the humanitarian response. And we've seen that one, you cannot have member of parliament using their own personal resources in order to respond to this. And a lot of members of parliament have had to do this. How do these people get breakfast? How do they eat lunch? I have seen volunteers, community health volunteers, coming up together and contributing 100, 200 shillings in order to be able to get people to eat. So the response time of the county and national government, at least the first 2 days, is something that we need to be able to look at. And my colleague here is there, look at what are some of the acts and the regulations that we have here, right, so that government doesn't have to form a task force on a time, on a day when you have a disaster, and people meeting in some residence to discuss how do we put together for the first 2 days a multi-agency team. The response time should be immediate. You should have fire engines there. You should have ambulances there. You should have personnel and people helping to dive and retrieve people there. And you should have help in terms of food, emergency, healthcare facilities, done within less than 6 hours of a disaster. Within the first 72 hours, I can tell you in Mathare constituency, there was nothing. I'm very happy that post the 72th hour, we had the governor of Nairobi, and I took a visit there together with the CS, Moses Kuria. And we had a response, at least 3 lorries of staff from the National Youth Service. So that was coming after 72 hours. People had starved. Perhaps some had died, some had disappeared, and I think this is one of the things that we need to be able to look. I think the last thing is about education. The last time I was here, Sam, we had very limited time to speak about this category of schools we call up-bet schools. And this is a good time to revisit this. Education infrastructure have completely been affected in informal settlements. And I'm not talking about the 24,000 public schools out of the 80,000 that I have. There is 56,000 people in my constituency who neither go to public nor private schools. The government doesn't know where they go because they are not budgeted for in terms of school infrastructure, in terms of capitation, in terms of teachers. These 56,000 go to a school that are neither public nor private. They are called APBET, Alternative Provision for Basic Education Schools. They are schools that during the evening are social halls, community halls. On a Sunday like yesterday, they are churches. Those have been swept off. If you're talking about some of the informal structures that have gone, you must address the question of where do these 56,000 children who the government doesn't cater for in any way who go to informal schools, what happens if you're opening schools today? And so I'm happy that the schools have been postponed, but it's coming late in the day. I myself was driving to the studio today when my children were being taken to school. So I had no idea that schools have been postponed. Right. So the amount of, how we deal with our communication is also very important. Government agencies, in terms of being able to have multi-agency response, is something that is absolutely lacking. So I think these are the issues that we need to deal with. And lastly, the issue about health. I know we are going to talk about the issues about doctor strike, but in terms of community health centers, community access to health. A lot of the people in informal settlements in my constituency, in Mathare, in Mukuru, mostly are only able to access level 1 community dispensaries. These are probably almost inaccessible right now. If you add that to the fact that there is a strike, then you have a disaster. So these are the issues then that are untold in my constituency and in informal settlements that need to be addressed.
Indeed, and of course we'll get back to the situation and the response that has been witnessed in this country over the past few days. But Mheshimiwa Ndeto, talk to us about, because like you're reading different messages on different platforms and parents expressing their dissatisfaction that this communication came so late in the night, knowing too well that these rains didn't start yesterday. In fact, the whole of last week it was chaotic. If you look at the situation on Friday and Saturday, it was also quite devastating. For a government to wait until so late to make such a decision, communicate so late in the night, while parents and learners have already made certain decisions and plans, I mean, is it fair? And what should the schooling community at least expect from the government?
Okay. Thank you, Sam. And first of all, to also agree with my colleague that, of course, the flooding situation in the country is dire. And I think I would like to take this early opportunity to send my message of condolence to all the people who have lost their loved ones. I think we are told now the count is about 83. There are about 40, 50 people missing. And, this is very, very sad. These are not just statistics. These are parents, these fathers, mothers, people's sons, daughters, and their families that whose lives have now temporarily, or rather have been shattered by the loss of their loved ones. Talking about the school opening, Sam, the flooding situation, as you know, is an unfolding situation. It is not one that you can always do a 5-week, planning around, especially about what may happen. So if I read the statement from the minister correctly, they say that they were gathering data, obviously, because, we have about, 23,000 public primary schools in this country and about 9,000 or so secondary schools. So they have to gather data depending on the various situations. If I give my own example of Tetu, for us, we do not have a flooding situation because of the nature of our terrain. Actually, what we fear more would be things like a landslide. So the schools there may not be affected. But when you talk about schools in Nairobi, when you talk about schools in Lower Eastern, when you talk about schools in parts of, Northeastern and all the other places that are facing the flooding, obviously this has to be taken care of. So I agree with the minister that they've got to balance everything and say, in the face of all what is happening, what is the decision that we should take. And I think the decision that the minister has taken, though we agree it came a little too late, especially, coming, late in the night when I'm sure many parents had organized how their children will come back to, go back to school. That decision, I think, is the right one. I would have maybe gone for a phased reopening, but again, to avoid any children being disadvantaged, maybe we should just postpone for a week. The weatherman, as much as sometimes we are not very sure about what the prediction, the weatherman has actually predicted that we should be seeing. Don't you think
that's where the problem lies? Because on Thursday night, the Kenya Meteorological Department, that was on 25th of April this year, and released a statement saying that the rain was going to intensify for the subsequent 72 hours. That was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I mean, and that communication is actually addressed to different people, including the presidency and cabinet secretaries. So when they receive such kind of communication, I mean, what are they doing with that information?
And that's why, Samra, I said, you've got to say, of course, if there'll be there has been rain in this country in the past. Of course, we've never had a situation where we had to close, schools. And that's why we're saying you have to get real data from the ground and say how many schools are submerged? How many, kids will be affected by this? And balance and say, if we have half of the country down, it is not fair to have half of the country's children going to school and the other half is not going to school. So I think that's what I'm saying is something that you've got to balance. But I agree with you. The communication coming at the time it came, is a little bit late. I think we need to be a little bit more decisive with the data that we get. We need to be taking actions a little bit early. And but I think the decision overall is the right one, at the moment. But Sam, if you allow me, just to stay a little bit with the issue of the floods, it is not just about the schools or the children who will not be able to go to school this morning. There's a lot of loss of livelihoods. We are talking about places where farmers have lost, entire fields of their crop. We are talking about thousands of livestock that has been, lost. I think 23,000 households have been, displaced. And, the destruction that we are seeing in our infrastructure, the roads, power lines, and there's a lot of quite some bit of, a disruption happening. And I think, Sam, what we need to do whenever events like these ones happen, it's a moment of introspection. It's a moment of saying, what do we need to do as a country? And obviously, there are short and medium-term and long-term things that we need to do. The short-term things is to ensure that as government, we respond very, very quickly to the people who have been affected, provide them with food and shelter, especially decent shelter, to ensure that, they are able to, survive, what they are going through. Look at things in terms of the medium term. Nairobi, for example, my brother here, Oluoch's constituency in Mathare, where a lot of people have built, on the riparian side of, the river. What do we do to ensure that long term, because this is not the first time we are seeing this in Kibera, in Mathare, and I don't think these people build along the riverbanks because they have some extra land somewhere that they are refusing to build at. So how do we start planning, first of all, in the medium term, to provide them maybe better passage along, these roads, to deepen these canals, and to provide better infrastructure for drainage. But the long-term solution is how do we ensure that we give our people decent housing? And I think this ties very well, to the affordable housing. The people of Mathare, I think, would benefit a lot, in the long term. All right.
We'll get back to that conversation. I first wanted to take a quick look at the statement by the Cabinet Secretary for Education. And I'm just looking at the weatherman that you're citing there. This statement was issued on 25th. And 12 p.m., I believe, and it is valid between 25th of April and 28th. That is from Thursday up until yesterday, 6 p.m. And the agency was expected, and they were saying that the heavy rainfall of more than 40 millimeters in 24 hours, pounding several parts of the Lake Victoria Basin. Okay, they have given the different measurements. I think the highest was about 50 millimeters in 24 hours. And the areas of concern, you would find that almost all the counties are actually listed there. And the instructions were to residents in all mentioned areas who are advised to be on the lookout for potential floods, flash floods, and poor visibility. The water levels in rivers, lakes, and dams are expected to remain high. And people living downstream rivers and along seasonal rivers should be careful, since water may appear suddenly, even though it may not be raining within the area. And this was directed to the Presidency, Cabinet Secretary, I believe, within the environment area, climate change and forestry. Then there was the PS in that same ministry, the Kenya Red Cross, Kenya Maritime Authority, Kenya Ports Authority, Kenya Airport Authority. And Mheshimiwa Kailemi, all this could have been tested on Saturday because of the images that we saw. The Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, the pictures from Tana River, whether it's in Garissa or wherever it is. But a decision about schools made in the night? How are you receiving it?
Actually, I'm even surprised I got to know about it just as I was coming here. I didn't know that. I actually met some kids coming to school as I was coming, and I'm wondering, what is happening, because of the floods. And much that is a good idea, as everyone here has said, it came quite late because some boarding school kids are already in school. So they don't know whether to come back home or just remain in the school. So the message came in quite late. I think we need to do some improvements in the way we do things. I don't want to blame it on anybody because we are the government. Mheshimiwa Oloch,
No, but you sit in Parliament. I mean, you oversight the government.
Yes, that's what we are saying. We are part of. We can't blame. We can't put fingers on anyone. So we actually need to up our game when it comes to floods. I wonder, year after year, you know, these things do occur, and we have scientists. In fact, I was thinking, I think we need to task our scientists even further. These are natural phenomena, so it's not anything much we can do. But at least the response should be faster. As Mheshimiwa Oloch has said, I'm very, very sympathetic. In fact, I wish to offer my sympathies and condolences to the ones who have lost their loved ones. It's such a, it's not a nice thing to think about what is happening to us. Knowing that, like you said, they had already said how much rain and what is going to happen. Sincerely, I was in Mombasa. I was one of the victims who had to come and go back.
Right.
Because the plane could not land at Jomo Kenyatta. So it was quite frightening. You have other issues, delays. I don't want to blame. It's about the rain, but I think we can do better as a government. We can do better. And even for us now as members of Parliament, I would suggest that we even put more budgets, because maybe these people have no money to do this kind of responses. Sympathies goes to Mathare. I know they have tried to go there and give food and give them places to stay, but it's not enough.
Right.
In fact, one time, there was an earthquake in Kobe a while ago, like 20 years ago or more. And the whole country went into a fundraiser for them. At least I was working with Ali Kothen, and I remember we did a lot of fundraising for money to go to Kobe. So I'm thinking, even here in Kenya, we can do something for our informal sector, Mukuru, Kwajenga, and Mathare, and even other parts of the country. Yeah, thank you.
All right, very interesting there. And Mheshimiwa Wandeta, you were talking about you're afraid of landslides, and they have landed. Several people fear dead in Kiganjo village, Gitugi ward, Mathia constituency, after 3 houses were swept away by huge landslides caused by heavy rain. 2 already rescued and rushed to Kiriaini Mission Hospital, and you'll be waiting for more news from there. We've seen some images that we'll be putting on the screen. So really, the heavy rains and the challenges that come with it are here with us. Fred, what are your thoughts this morning, even as you reflect on what should have been the start of the second term?
Thank you, Sam. First of all, allow me also to send my message of condolence to those families who have been affected. It is very sad, and we hope that they are helped. And just like Mheshimiwa Oloch, this morning my kids, actually when I was leaving, they had prepared to go to school. And getting here, I saw the press statement that was apparently sent late last night. It's unfortunate that the government is not coordinated. But one thing that we are still wondering, this is a disaster. It has caused a serious disruption, widespread in human, material, in our economy, in our environment, and therefore it has risks and threats. I don't know why President Ruto has not declared this a national disaster yet, while this is a serious disaster with risks. And we do hope that he will come out today or tomorrow and declare this a national disaster. Given that now schools have been postponed, transport is interfered with, planes cannot land at JKIA, it is interfering materially, economically, and socially. Then again, if you remember, in 2002, we have talked about data, and 2008, there were floods in the Nyanza region, Busia, Budalangi, Rift Valley, and the casualties were estimated. I remember in 2008, there were casualties estimated that 24 were dead, over 2,300 were affected, and so on and so forth. There's that data. This time round, what the media is reporting is even slightly higher. Again, we are still not seeing this as a disaster, and we are not declaring this a national disaster. But this brings me to, what are the challenges that we experience, and what have we seen? Number one, what we are seeing as challenges that we must address pronto is an uncoordinated approach to disaster management. The CS in charge of infrastructure and transport gave a statement actually advising the public and motorists to be careful. Then the CS education comes in much later, gives a statement to the effect that the school opening has been postponed. That is not coordinated. Number two, we have got challenges with the resources. We have seen what we call inadequate finance and human resource and equipment. I saw for the first time boats being used in Nairobi to try and evacuate those who are affected. When Governor Sakaja sometimes back told the public that he had actually budgeted for some boats because we were expecting El Nino then, right, people actually mocked him. But see, today here we are seeing boats in Nairobi being used to evacuate. Then there's also issue of weak disaster management capabilities within the communities and in the institutions that are concerned. We don't see that. The coordination of the NYS, the KDF, the police, the Red Cross, that is a challenge that we are having. And therefore, it takes me to the point, do we really have a functioning or working national disaster management policy? Do we have an authority or an agency that can be used to coordinate all these things? You just read for us there what the Met Department said the other day. They actually gave an indication of what is expected to happen with these floods in the next 72 hours. It addressed that to the presidency and all other departments concerned. The government did not do anything. We saw them giving some relief food the other day and addressing those issues, which was very good. But you see, what are we going to do going forward? Because even these schools that have been, postponed, the opening, I don't think 6 days will be enough to deal with all these issues. Honorable Wandeto comes from Tetu. Well, there could be no floods, but I'm sure there are students who school elsewhere that have been affected because where they will be going to school, roads have been interfered with, probably landslide somewhere. So everyone is affected some. And therefore we say, this is a national disaster. Yesterday, we pleaded with the government, Azimio, and I remember Honorable Eugene Wamalwa asking the government to consider postponing. We are happy that the government has considered that, though it's coming very late. I saw Mheshimiwa Alice Nganga saying the same thing. The Citizen TV reported several parents who are worried that what is going to happen to their kids when they report to school today. And that evening, it was raining heavily. So I think with these weaknesses that we are identifying, there is urgent need for the government to declare this a national disaster. President William Ruto must come out probably this morning, declare this a national disaster. The government must coordinate all the relevant departments and authorities to ensure that there is smooth management of the risks that are coming with this disaster. Right. The floods are huge. You saw in Homa Bay, Sindo, I'm sure Anthony Roche, you know that place, where the flood swept everything. And remember, it is at the slope just next to the lake. We can see that even areas that the rains are not very high, but the floods are coming from elsewhere and sweeping everything. We believe that we have an opportunity as a country to come together. Kenya Kwanza government must put everything aside and engage on issues of addressing the disaster that we have today called floods. Okay. The floods are wreaking havoc. People are dying. Some have been evacuated. Some are still missing. The numbers are massive. We have lack of communication and accurate information as far as data is concerned. We actually don't know how many have died so far. The media reports, but are those numbers accurate? Because that's what the media can get. Where is the authority that is going to give the public the actual number of those who are missing, those who are dead? households that are affected, families that are missing, and schools that are affected. Because by the time the minister postpones the opening, it appears that majority of the schools are affected.
Okay. All right. And I want us to take a short break here on the break. When we come back, I'll be bringing you some updates of the situation in the country, what the heavy rains is doing, including some landslide in Murang'a County. We'll be speaking to our correspondent there, Victor Kinodia, to give us more details in as far as the fatalities, but also persons that are missing and the rescue operation that is going on there. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.